If we were living back in the golden age of radio, 1925 to 1940, a radio like this 1939 Crosley would probably be the focal point of our living rooms. This was entertainment before the age of television, before Nintendo or PlayStations. This was the family centerpiece. And it brought to us music, programming, news, sports, from all over the world, in fact. It was quite an invention and quite a change in society. We go back to 1916 when the first experimental radio program was broadcasting one of the operas from the Met in New York City. But it was 1920 when the first professional radio program was produced by station KDK in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that they broadcast the election results of the Warren G. Harding victory, the landslide victory. Now that victory was only heard, however, by a few hundred people. KDKA radio station was on the 6th floor of the Westinghouse building in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They were broadcasting with a very small set, and not very many people owned radios to hear it anyway. So it was only a few blocks of coverage that people could hear it. But at least it was a step towards the programming that existed in this golden age and beyond. By the 1920s, regular programming is going to begin, and people are going to be buying radios. By 1929, in fact, there were 5 million radios in American households. Don't think of radio like you hear today or like you turn on your car radio or anything like that. They're a lot different. As you can see from behind here, that we had these things called tubes that actually had to warm up before you could make any reception. And if one went out, you had to find whichever one it was, maybe have to check them all to replace to see which one was actually the one that had burned out. Very simple, yet compared to our radios today, it did a lot of good work. We can tune different stations on here and see what was playing here if it were our living room right now. You heard Glenn Miller's orchestra a moment ago. I think we might still be hearing some of that on this station if we turn up the volume. But if we were to change stations, we would hear some of the other type of programming. And I'll try and find something on the dial here that resembles something you might be a little familiar with. It must be Tuesday at 7 o'clock if it's the Lone Ranger. We could set our watches by the programming on radio. They were so precise because they had to be in the early days of radio. Westerns, detective stories, science fiction stories, the comedy of teams like Abbott and Costello in their Who's on First routine, situation comedies like Jack Benny program, people who are coming from vaudeville and finding a new medium of entertainment in the radio. But it wasn't all entertainment either. Imagine yourselves 1941 and you're sitting around listening to some Glenn Miller music. It's a routine evening, but when you turn your dial to a particular station, you would find some other events taking place.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air, President Roosevelt has just announced. The attack also was made on all naval and military activities on the principal island of Oahu.
Hello, NBC. This is Bert Salmon speaking from Manila, and this time I've got a real scoop for you. Manila has just been bombed. In fact, right now it is being bombed. The all-clear signal had sounded, and then, without warning, Japanese bombers started bombing Fort William McKinley, Nichols Airfield, and the RCA transmitting station.
Can you imagine the attention focused on a small wooden box when news like that hits the United States? It wasn't seen on TV. You had to exercise your imagination to imagine what that war was like, what those people looked like. And that was something that is a little different than today with television, where we see images ourselves. But it required a different type of people, different type of generation perhaps, one that did exercise that imagination, that will lead to some creativity and advances not just in radio, but by the 1950s, television. It's television, after all, that's going to lead to the end of the golden age of radio. No more writing for these programs, no more, they're writing for television now, a new medium that will replace this wonderful Crosley of 1939.